Clean and disinfection will always be a major part of infection control and prevention. Control Today over the years has run many articles about best approaches and new methods. Infection preventionists, of course, are very into this subject. So are other healthcare professionals, including environmental service teams and sterile processors, to name just two. Going on right now is the ISSA show North America 2021 in Las Vegas. Now, ISSA has existed under several different names for 94 years. One of those names was the International Sanitary Supply Association, or ISSA. In 2005, when the association branched out to include cleaning service providers, the name was officially changed to ISSA, the Worldwide Cleaning Industry Association. Hi, I'm Frank Diamond, the managing editor of Infection Control Today. One of the many studies being discussed at the ISSA show this week was co-written by our good friend Jason Tetro, who has appeared on these broadcasts many times during the COVID-19 pandemic to help us figure out just what exactly is going on. Jason co-wrote a study with Professor Syed Sattar about the ATP disinfection technique. ATP shows a lot of promise, but as pointed out in the study, there are also hurdles to making it a standard method of disinfection in hospitals and other healthcare settings. Jason, thanks for joining us here again at Infection Control Today.
It's great to be joining you again.
Okay, could you give us a little rundown about ATP disinfection? I know there's a lot of history involved here, right?
Well, yeah, ATP itself is actually something that we all have inside of us. If you go back to even first year university, where we talked about energy formation in the body, you would see that, one glucose molecule equals, I believe it's 37 ATP molecules, right? And so ATP has always been viewed as a measure of energy. However, ATP is also viewed as something that shares energy other than just something that we utilize to, move in that. And one of them happens to be the formation of light. And this is actually something that was discovered a number of years ago, back in the 1800s, whereby ATP, along with a particular molecule, we call it luciferin, could actually lead to the formation of light. And what that did is it created the basic backbone for a test to determine whether or not microbes might happen to be in any given environment. The way it works is this. ATP is produced by microbes just like us. You have a vial with luciferin, and then you swab to make sure that you've got some microbes on it. You put that into a tube, the ATP comes out of the microbes, and it actually comes into the luciferin, and you form light. And that was basically the genesis of this test, whereby you can identify whether or not you've done proper disinfection. Because remember, what we want to do with disinfection is reduce the number of bacteria and other living organisms to levels that are safe. One really good way to do that, according to the ATP method, is by seeing if there's any ATP there. And that's basically where it started. And over time, it has gone from the laboratory into the field and actually can be seen in a number of places, from clean rooms to food processing to, of course, healthcare facilities.
Your study notes that although ATP shows a lot of promise, there are also significant hurdles before it becomes something that can be always relied on, healthcare setting especially.
Yeah.
You'd like to care to extrapolate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, I started working in the ATP field back in the early aughts, the 2000s. And right off the bat, we had one very, very important question, and that is, can we actually identify the number of microbes that happen to be on that surface through the use of ATP? And there are two answers. The first answer is yes, if you have an appropriate reference standard that mimics the surface that you have used. And you can do this in a laboratory. So I can take little coupons, put differing numbers of microbes on that, swipe them, make sure that I have the swabbing down, standard operating protocol, create a titration curve, and then I would be able to know exactly how many bacteria are there. But that's for one surface under one controlled environment. When you go into the field, you have an infinite number of environments. And as a result of that, you can never have a perfect titration curve. And as a result, as we found, you can never actually do quantification of microbes using the ATP test. And that's a huge issue, especially when you want to be able to identify the efficacy or the effectiveness of your cleaning. Because we all talk about log reduction. We talk about how many or how few microbes have been left behind. If you can't do that quantification, you can't really do a proper infection prevention and control audit. Now, there's another issue, which is the fact that that luciferin with ATP coming together is a great reaction when it's alone. But there are a number of interfering molecules that actually can not only hamper or quench the luminescence, but also enhance or augment the luminescence, which means that you're not necessarily getting a very good result because there's this potential for all of these problems. And then finally, we have what is known as sampling error. And anybody who's an infection preventionist who has ever done an audit of infection prevention control knows sampling error is a huge issue. Because at the end of the day, when we're swabbing, doesn't matter what we're swabbing, a 10 by 10, if you don't have an absolute standard operating procedure with the exact same type of swab, you're never going to get repeatable results. And this is, again, something that I tried in the field in hospitals. I just simply could never get my sampling error down to something that was reasonable. So everything really comes down to an estimation, which if you happen to be, say, in a clean room where you want absolutely no microbes whatsoever, is okay. Or if you happen to be in a food processing facility where you want no microbes on that counter, it's great. But when you're talking about a healthcare facility where the presence of microbes could literally mean a life or death situation for someone, you want to have something that's far more accurate in terms of the quantification without any chance for sampling error or interference with the luminescence.
One of the things I thought particularly interesting about your study is that it was almost like a call to, and I couched it this way, a call to entrepreneurs and inventors out there to come up with some solutions to the problems you just outlined.
Yeah.
Do you see, is it so far-fetched that they could come up with solutions, or is there any way of knowing that it's just around the corner, or it's 10 years away?
Well, I think right now where we stand is this. ATP is great, as I said, when you have the luciferin and the ATP coming together. That's what you want. What you want to be able to do then is somehow find a way to remove all the other problems. And that's where the entrepreneurial spirit should come into play. We want to focus on that one reaction so that we know exactly what we're dealing with and not to worry about all the other concerns that are there. And I think what we're starting to see now is the ability to improve upon these particular issues by focusing on individual pieces, such as interference, or such as signal loss or signal degradation, or even just simply sampling error. I mean, we've gotten to a point where we can have better swabs. We got to a point where we have a better solution where you actually do the testing. So I think in that sense, especially for people who are attending conferences such as ISSA, which is incredibly valuable. I've been there myself, it's wonderful. You want to be able to have the ability to tell somebody who's going to be doing that test, you don't need to worry about these other things. And that was really important in the review that I wrote or co-authored with Dr. Sattar, was that we didn't want to go negative because ATP does have some value, especially when you're doing auditing of cleaning as opposed to disinfection. But when we're talking about those situations where it really does come down to potential life or death, you want to have that ability to be absolutely certain. And while there are other options out there at the moment, I still think that there is a potential for life for ATP as long as the right entrepreneur has those solutions.
I know in interviewing other experts about ultraviolet light disinfection, they say that one of the problems is that you have to depend on what the manufacturer says the device can do.
Mhm.
There apparently isn't any, the FDA probably and the EPA don't really monitor or grade those devices. Is that the same problem with ATP at the moment?
Well, I mean, when it comes to ATP monitoring, because there really isn't any kind of regulatory that we know of that's going to make sure, because it is so varied, right?
Mhm.
It just really comes down to the idea that you can definitely use this to look at cleaning, which is, a really great way of saying, okay, well, there's no dirt, there's no grime, there's potentially no bacteria, that type of thing. But to find the perfect regulatory niche for this particular product, um, you know, first off, is it worth doing? I don't know. I think that there's the potential for life, but basically, since we can't do that direct link between quantification and ATP results, it may not be it may not be worth exploring in that sense. Um, I would very much like to see methodologies that we could possibly use, but at this stage, um, you know, the technology has advanced so far that maybe ATP will have to be part of a different type of regimen, and then that may go through regulatory approvals.
Administrators might look at this and say, well, it doubles the work for the EBS teams. They have to go in and get all the stuff that you can see off, right?
Mhm.
And then they have to, use whatever device they can to disinfect.
Mhm.
So how does one respond to something like that?
We all know that if we're doing any kind of reprocessing of medical devices, we have to do the pre-cleaning step, right? So I think in that sense, when you're looking at something that is, critical, you have a much greater focus on it. I think what we're missing though is that the bar that you use to help you walk in a hallway can be just as critical. And I think we need to change the mentality to something where we're no longer talking about just cleaning and disinfection. We want to try and find opportunities to be able to do the two combined in one. And we are seeing more products that are coming out that have that cleaning, saponification, micelle formation, as well as the disinfection, which has an active ingredient that is known to have an effect on a variety of different microbial species. And we're also seeing various different active ingredients being combined in that light. Now, of course, I don't talk about individual brands here, but what I would say is that if you were to explore, especially at ISSA, the idea of two in one, you're going to have a number of options at your disposal. And I think then it just simply comes down to what is important to you in terms of what you want to be able to kill.
Is there anything I neglected to ask you, Jason, about this subject, about your study, about ISSA and their conference that you want other people to know?
Yeah, I think one thing that we always have to be sure of is when we're looking at a technology that has been around for, in the case of ATP, at least 20 years, because that's when I was first introduced to it, we have to realize that there are also going to be other alternatives. Okay. And while ATP may seem like something that is a standard, it really hasn't proven to be a standard. And so what you can do is you can open up your avenues to look at other options. And the reason I say that is because that's what makes a place like ISSA so important. It gives you an opportunity to see what is out there so that when it does come down to decision-making time, for those procurement officers, it's not about whether we go with this one and do this. It's about looking at a range of options and doing the necessary due diligence to find out which one is going to be best. And I would very much recommend that you always include the infection prevention control people in that because they know what's happening on the floor. So whether it's ATP, whether it's optical, whether it's a two-in-one cleaning disinfectant, always make sure that the infection preventionists are there with you because they're going to help you make sure that the decision you make is one everybody is going to accept.
Jason Tetro, thank you so much for joining us again at the Infection Control Today.
It was such a pleasure. Take care.